The Erebus was a marvel of human engineering, a self-sustaining ark gliding through the black void of space, its mission to explore and catalog worlds that could become humanity's salvation. Deep within its steel corridors, a symphony of whirring machines and soft mechanical hums provided a reassuring sense of control. But this ship was not invincible, and the vast unknown held secrets that even its creators couldn't foresee. Sasha Emery tapped a gloved finger on her datapad, scanning rows of plants in the hydroponics bay. Each leafy specimen glistened under artificial sunlight, the byproduct of precise engineering meant to ensure the survival of the crew. Yet something caught her eye, a thin, dark red thread weaving through the roots of a crop that shouldn't have been there. She knelt, running a scanner over the anomaly. "System, run a pathogen check," she muttered, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of grow lights. "Pathogen presence undetected," the AI responded in its flat, detached tone. Frowning, Sasha double-checked the readings. The tendrils didn't match any plant species in their database. They pulsed faintly, as if alive. A sour feeling twisted in her stomach. She took a sample, sealed it in a sterile container, and sent a priority report to the ship's xenobiologist, Dr. Elias Kraft. The following morning, Sasha felt a slight nosebleed trickle as she drank her morning coffee in the mess hall. Wiping her nose, she dismissed it as dehydration. The crew bustled around her, joking and exchanging gossip about life aboard the ship. But her dreams that night were anything but ordinary. She woke drenched in sweat, her pulse racing. In her nightmare, crimson veins writhed under her skin, burrowing deeper as she screamed. The dream left her disoriented, but the voice on the intercom soon cut through her thoughts. "Emery, you're late for your shift in hydroponics," Mira's voice, sharp and professional, reminded her. "On my way," she croaked, though her head throbbed. Pushing aside her unease, she made her way down the quiet corridors, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow. When she arrived, the sight that greeted her sent a jolt of fear coursing through her veins. The dark red tendrils had spread overnight. They wove through every row of plants like parasitic veins, pulsating faintly with rhythmic contractions. Sasha stumbled back, her breath quickening as the scent of iron filled the air. This was no mere infection. She activated the containment protocols, sealing off the bay. The AI's voice chimed in. "Hydroponics quarantined," awaiting further instructions. Sasha left immediately, her fingers trembling as she keyed in another priority report to Dr. Kraft and the captain. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Her body ached with an unusual stiffness, and her headache sharpened into a dull, insistent thrum. As she returned to her cabin, the hallway seemed longer than usual, the shadows deeper. That evening, Sasha didn't show up for dinner. When a security team arrived at her cabin hours later, the door was locked from the inside. After overriding the lock, they found her sprawled on the floor, convulsing. Blood smeared the walls in frantic streaks, and her body bucked violently as if struggling against an invisible force. "Medbay, now!" one of the guards shouted, hefting her limp body. Inside the medbay, the scene grew worse. Sasha's skin stretched and rippled unnaturally, as though something moved beneath it. Her breathing came in ragged gasps, and her eyes darted wildly, unfocused and filled with terror. "Get her stabilized," the medic barked, sweat beading his forehead as he fumbled with a syringe. But before the needle could pierce her skin, a wet, tearing sound filled the room. Sasha screamed, a blood-curdling wail that crescendoed into a gurgling choke. The sound echoed like a dirge for the living. Her chest arched upward, ribs visibly straining against her skin before splitting open with a sickening crack. Blood sprayed across the medbay, splattering equipment and walls. Something emerged. It was a mass of sinewy, fibrous tissue, its surface glistening with viscous fluid. The creature twitched, resembling a grotesque amalgam of flesh and bone, with spindly appendages resembling half-formed human limbs. Its face, or what might have been a face, was featureless, save for a gaping maw that emitted a low, resonant hiss. The medics froze, their bodies paralyzed with a primal fear. Before anyone could react, the creature bolted, its movements impossibly quick. It squeezed through a vent, leaving behind only a trail of blood and the disemboweled remains of Sasha Emery. The ship's alarms blared. The AI's monotone voice announced, "Containment breach detected in medbay. Quarantine activated." Captain Mira Delacroix arrived moments later, her face pale as she surveyed the carnage. Her voice was steady but tinged with tension as she addressed the crew over the intercom. "Crew, this is Captain Delacroix. We have a biohazard situation. Remain in your designated areas until further notice. We will contain this." But in the back of her mind, Mira knew containment was a fragile word in the face of something they didn't understand. The corridors of the Erebus felt colder now, as if the ship itself had withdrawn its warmth in the wake of Sasha Emery's death. The silence was no longer comforting, but oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of machinery and the crackle of the intercom. The crew worked in strained silence, their fear a shared but unspoken bond. Yet, fear wasn't the only thing creeping through the ship. Captain Mira Delacroix sat at the central command console, poring over logs and schematics. Every breath she took felt heavy with responsibility. She replayed the medbay footage, wincing as the moment of Sasha's death flickered across the screen. The creature that emerged was unlike anything she had ever seen. Worse, it had vanished into the ship's labyrinthine ventilation system, evading every search attempt. "Captain!" Dr. Elias Kraft's voice crackled through her comms. "I need you in the lab. Now." Mira didn't hesitate, striding down the corridor with sharp, determined steps. When she entered the lab, Elias was hunched over a microscope, his face drawn and pale. On the nearby display, magnified images of the alien tendrils twisted and pulsated, their fibrous structures more akin to muscle tissue than plant life. "This isn't just a parasite," Elias said, not bothering with pleasantries. "It's a neural organism, a hive mind, I think. It doesn't just infect a host, it connects them, integrates them." "Into what?" Mira asked, her voice cold and steady. Elias hesitated, then gestured to a secondary monitor displaying the recovered samples. "Something bigger. The growth in hydroponics isn't random. It's expanding in patterns, almost like a network. I think it's trying to turn the ship into a habitat." Mira stiffened. "And the crew? If we're exposed, any of us, it can rewrite us on a cellular level. Sasha wasn't just killed, she was Repurposed? Before Mira could respond, the lights flickered and the ship's AI announced, "Critical malfunction in hydroponics bay. Fire suppression activated." Mira's comm buzzed with frantic voices. "Captain, it's spreading!" cried Lieutenant Jensen from the engineering deck. "Whatever that thing is, it's in the walls. It's in the damn walls." The infection accelerated. Within hours, the hydroponics bay was a mass of fleshy growths, tendrils crawling like living arteries through the machinery. The creature had begun to affect the ship's systems. Lights flickered sporadically, and doors refused to open or shut at random. The AI, usually calm and precise, seemed almost sluggish, as if something was interfering with its programming. Worse, the crew began showing symptoms. It started with subtle signs, nosebleeds, headaches, and irritability. But soon, the changes became impossible to ignore. Ensign Patel collapsed during a routine inspection, his body convulsing violently before his veins darkened and bulged grotesquely. His crewmates dragged him to the medbay, but it was too late. As his chest heaved unnaturally, they sealed the medbay doors, unwilling to risk another repeat of Sasha's fate. Paranoia gripped the crew. Every cough, every sweat-soaked brow became a cause for suspicion. Dr. Kraft tried to isolate the infected, but the symptoms were erratic and hard to predict. Tensions boiled over during a meeting in the mess hall. "We need to kill anyone showing signs of infection," shouted Jensen, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "We can't take chances." "And what if you're next?" snapped Senior Engineer Valeria. "Do we kill you too, Jensen? Or is it only convenient when it's someone else?" The argument dissolved into shouting, and Mira had to slam her palm against the table to silence them. "Enough," she barked. "We stick to the plan. Quarantine and containment. No one gets executed on my watch." But her authority was waning. She could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the fear. It was only a matter of time before someone broke. As the days wore on, the creature's presence grew more pervasive. Crew members reported hearing strange noises, wet, slithering sounds that echoed through the ventilation shafts. Some claimed to hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, but unnervingly familiar. Equipment began to malfunction more frequently, as though the ship itself were conspiring against them. Mira ordered a full lockdown, confining the crew to the central decks while they searched for a solution. But even the lockdown wasn't foolproof. Valeria disappeared during her shift, and when they found her, she was no longer human. Her body had contorted grotesquely, her limbs elongated and bent at unnatural angles. Her face, still eerily recognizable, was twisted into a rictus of pain and rage as she lunged at her former comrades. It took 3 crew members to bring her down, and even then her body continued to twitch long after her death. Elias conducted an autopsy on what remained of Valeria, his hands shaking as he worked. "The infection rewires the nervous system," he explained grimly. "It's not just using their bodies, it's controlling them like puppets. And it learns. Every time it takes one of us, it gets smarter." Mira clenched her fists. "Then we have to stop it before it takes us all." But as she left the lab, the whispered voices grew louder, echoing through the dimly lit corridors. They weren't words, not exactly, but a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "You will become us," the voices seemed to say. You will endure." The Erebus was no longer just a ship. It had become a battleground. The walls, once pristine, were now streaked with fleshy growths that pulsed faintly, like the breathing of some immense unseen beast. Lights flickered intermittently, casting the corridors in a hellish glow. The air was damp and metallic, filled with the smell of blood and decay. The ship was alive, but it wasn't theirs anymore. Captain Mira Delacroix stood in the command center, surrounded by the last remnants of her crew. Only 8 of the original 20 remained, and the toll showed on their gaunt faces. They all carried weapons now, though none of them trusted their aim against the thing that had claimed their ship. Elias Craft's voice broke the silence. "It's not just about survival anymore," he said, his tone grim. "The Hive is winning. It's adapting faster than we can respond." He gestured to a display showing the spread of the infection. The hydroponics bay was entirely consumed, its machinery overrun by the alien biomass. The medical wing was no better, and now tendrils had begun encroaching on the engineering deck. The ship's AI, sluggish and unresponsive, was effectively useless. Its monotone announcements were corrupted, occasionally merging with the Hive's whispers in chilling harmony. "We're running out of time," Elias continued. "It's using the infected as extensions of itself, and it's learning how to manipulate the ship's systems. If it gains control of propulsion, it'll take the ship and spread to other planets," Mira finished, her voice steely. "We can't let that happen." The crew split into 2 groups, one tasked with setting traps for the infected, and the other attempting to rig the ship's reactor for self-destruct. Mira led the latter, knowing it was the only way to stop the Hive. The plan was desperate, but desperation was all they had left. As Mira and her team made their way to engineering, the ship seemed to shift around them. Corridors that had been familiar now felt labyrinthine, and the whispers were constant. "You belong to us," they seemed to say. "We are one." They passed what remained of Lieutenant Jensen. His body fused grotesquely to the wall. His arms were splayed wide, his face twisted into a grimace of pain and fury. Tendrils extended from his torso, twitching faintly as if still alive. Mira forced herself to look away. "Keep moving," she ordered, but the Hive was relentless. As they reached the reactor room, the infected descended upon them. These were no longer their crewmates. They were horrors of twisted flesh and sinew, their bodies barely recognizable as human. Their movements were jerky yet coordinated, driven by the Hive's singular will. "Hold them off," Mira shouted as the team scrambled to barricade the reactor room. Elias and the others worked quickly, bypassing safety protocols to prime the reactor for overload. Every second felt like an eternity as the infected pounded against the barricade, their distorted voices rising in an unholy chorus. "You cannot stop us. You will become us." The Hive was inside the ship's systems now, speaking through the AY with a chilling clarity. "Captain Delacroix," it said, its voice a grotesque amalgam of the AI's monotone and the infected's whispers. "You misunderstand. We do not destroy. We evolve. Humanity is fragile. We will endure." Mira clenched her fists. "You've killed my crew. You've twisted their bodies into monsters. That's not evolution. That's annihilation." The Hive laughed. or something akin to laughter. They are more than they were. You could be too. Mira fired a shot into the console, silencing the voice, but she knew it wasn't gone. It was everywhere now, in the walls, the air, the very bones of the ship. As the team finished setting the reactor, the infected broke through the barricade. Mira fired her weapon until it overheated, taking down 2 of the creatures, but they kept coming. Elias screamed as one of them pounced on him, its tendrils burrowing into his skin. Mira pulled him free, but the damage was done. His eyes glazed over and his body convulsed as the hive began to take him. "Go," he gasped, his voice barely his own. "Finish it." Mira hesitated, but only for a moment. She grabbed the detonator and ran, leaving Elias behind. His screams followed her down the corridor, but she didn't look back. Back in the command center, Mira gathered the remaining survivors. Only 3 were left. Herself, Senior Engineer Valeria Ortega, and Ensign Marcus Hale. Valeria was pale and trembling, her arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Marcus stared blankly ahead, his breathing shallow. "We have 1 shot at this," Mira said, her voice firm. "The reactor will overload in 10 minutes. We need to get to the escape pods and eject before it blows." But as they made their way to the pod bay, the hive unleashed its final assault. The infected swarmed from every direction, their grotesque forms blocking the path. Mira fought with everything she had, but she could feel the weight of the hive pressing down on her. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony that threatened to drown her thoughts. "You cannot win," the hive said, its voice echoing through the corridor. "We are infinite. You are temporary." But Mira wasn't listening. She pushed Marcus and Valeria ahead, covering their retreat as the infected closed in. "Get to the pods," she shouted. "Go!" The last thing she saw before the horde consumed her was the blinking light of the detonator in her hand. She pressed it with her final breath, her defiance echoing in the silence as the Erebus exploded, a brilliant flash of light in the endless void. As the escape pod drifted away, Valeria stared out the viewport, tears streaming down her face. In the distance, a fragment of the Erebus floated, a small, dark object moving within it. The hive was not gone. It had survived, and it was waiting. The escape pod drifted in silence, the only sound the faint hum of its life support system. Valeria Ortega sat motionless in the cramped compartment, her chest heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. The viewport revealed a sea of stars, vast and indifferent, as the last remnants of the Erebus floated in the distance, a ship once filled with life, now a tomb. But Valeria was not alone. She clutched her arm, where dark veins had begun to creep beneath her skin, forming intricate patterns that pulsed faintly, as if in rhythm with an unseen heartbeat. The infection had followed her. It was in her blood now, whispering softly in her mind. She tried to focus, to block it out, but the voice was relentless. "You survived," it said, a calm, chilling resonance echoing inside her skull. "You are part of us now. The fight is over." "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her reflection in the viewport stared back at her, pale and hollow-eyed. "You don't win. Not like this." The pod's automated systems beeped, breaking her reverie. A destination was locked, one of the uncharted planets the Erebus had been sent to explore. The trajectory was perfect. It would land in a fertile zone, the ideal place for a new beginning. But Valeria knew it wasn't a beginning for humanity. It was a beginning for the Hive. She leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. She thought of Mira, Elias, Sasha, and the others, faces twisted in pain and terror, lives snuffed out by the thing that had claimed their ship. Their sacrifice couldn't be for nothing. She wouldn't let the Hive spread, not if there was still a choice left to her. The pod's navigation screen blinked. Manual override was still an option. Her fingers hovered over the controls, shaking as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Why fight?" the Hive asked, its voice almost soothing. "You are tired. Rest. Let us carry the burden." Her hands balled into fists. "You don't get to decide," she muttered through clenched teeth. "Not for me, not for anyone else." Summoning every ounce of strength, Valeria took the manual controls. The pod shuddered as she altered its course, redirecting it away from the lush, habitable zone and toward the planet's volatile atmosphere. The trajectory adjusted, and alarms began to blare, a cacophony of warnings about heat shields, gravitational pull, and imminent destruction. The whispers turned to screams. "You will die," the Hive shrieked, its voice an unholy chorus. "You will destroy yourself for nothing. You are one. We are infinite." Valeria gritted her teeth, ignoring the pain coursing through her arm as the veins beneath her skin bulged and writhed. The infection was spreading faster now, her body growing weaker with every passing second. Her vision blurred, but she held the controls steady, guiding the pod into the planet's fiery embrace. The heat grew unbearable. The walls of the pod glowed red-hot, and Valeria's breath came in labored gasps. Her infected arm moved involuntarily, twitching as if the Hive were trying to seize control. She strapped it down with a length of cable, biting back a scream as the tendrils beneath her skin fought to break free. "You think this will stop us?" the Hive hissed. "We are eternal. You are nothing but a dying fragment." But Valeria only smiled, a grim, defiant smile filled with the weight of everything she had lost and everything she refused to surrender. "Then I'll die as myself," she whispered. The pod broke through the planet's atmosphere, its exterior ablaze as it hurtled toward the volatile surface below. Flames licked at the viewport, and the interior grew impossibly hot. Valeria's body convulsed, the infection seizing her nerves, but she refused to let go. Her fingers gripped the controls until the very end. In her final moments, she saw their faces, Mira's unwavering determination, Elias's quiet brilliance, Sasha's nervous laughter. They had all fought, all sacrificed to give her this chance, and she wouldn't fail them. The pod struck the surface with a cataclysmic explosion, a brilliant burst of light that lit up the desolate landscape. The impact vaporized everything: the pod, the infection, and the last remnants of the Hive. Somewhere far away in the vast expanse of space, a single fragment of the Hive drifted through the void, small, silent, and waiting. But for now the darkness held its breath, and the stars bore witness to the quiet end of a desperate, defiant fight.